Tape Deck Media.
My friend Dan, he's got a podcast, cause all comics need a podcast, and nobody had a podcast called The Art of Bombing. So Dan went out and bought a tape deck. Who knows why he bought a tape deck? Now podcasts don't get played on tape decks, but Dan is from the 80s. So hey there, all you funny jerks, come talk to Dan about your work. Tell him all about your worst times. It's The Art of Bombing. Welcome to an all-new episode of The Art of Bombing presents Between Bombs Callbacks, where Josh and I call back the most recent episode. In this episode, we are calling back episode 293. No, 94. I'm wrong. 94. Calling 94 with Christopher Keith Tyler. Great conversation. We've got some great talking points that'll be coming from that. But before we get into that, I got a couple quick announcements up top. First thing, it is December. Happy holidays. We hope everybody has a great holiday. Just want to remind everybody, we will be taking our typical annual hiatus that we usually do in December. So this will be the last episode of the year, and then we'll be back with season 8 in January. And we've already got a bunch of conversations in the bank. So we've already got a bunch of great content ready for 2024. So it's going to be fantastic. And if you listen to the intro, you probably heard the new bumper, Tape Deck Media. Happy to announce that we are now part of Tape Deck Media podcast network and comedy label. I will also admit that it is my company, so that's why we're part of it. This is my new Tape Deck Media, is my new comedy label and podcast network. And we're going to be doing some cool things. The Art of Bombing is going to be pretty much one of the flagship podcasts with the new network. I've also got some other podcasts in development with other comedians. And I've got we're doing some negotiations with some other comedians to bring their podcasts on the network. So there's going to be some fun stuff with Tape Deck Media. And we're excited. Art of Bombing is excited to be part of that. So, and if you're an Uber nerd, you probably know, or comedy nerd, big fan of this show, you probably got the reference of Tape Deck Media, how I came up with that name. And if it's not obvious, you need to go back about 2 minutes and listen to the intro again. I think
we're both about to say the same thing here.
I think we were.
What can they do, Dano?
Well, I think Josh, they can go back and listen to last week's episode. So not only will they get the reference for Tape Deck Media, they'll also get the references that we're about to talk about when we talk about last week's episode.
All right.
All right. Let's here's your chance to go back and listen to episode 294 with Christopher Keith Tyler.
Nice.
All right. That was great.
I got all that done. Here. I'd already heard the episode, so I worked on my taxes.
Nice. It's very early to do taxes, but hey, get ahead of that.
It is indeed.
Get ahead of that. You never know when the tax man's going to come knocking on your door.
That's right. Yeah. Well, you do know these days,
yeah.
But still, it is good.
That's because we have doorbell cameras.
Yeah, and taxes are generally due on the same day each year.
Yes.
Now, if you don't pay them, then you kind of don't know when you're going to get a letter in the mail that's like, "Where's my money at?" And then there's a whole thing. You got to make some phone calls. That's not fun. But you know what is fun? Christopher Keith Tyler. Couple topics.
I know some great content came out of this.
Yeah, and so there's one big one. Before I get to the big one, I'll take the small one. So we'll do the minnow before the whale. Small one is there was a discussion on it about putting your material online for people to hear as content. In other words, like using your comedy, chopping it up into bits and, creating a content strategy with it. That's been talked about before. But what was unique to this, though, was the dilemma between putting out your stuff as material for people to consume, people to get an idea of who you are, prepare them for your material, versus actually taking crowd work moments from your sets and putting those out instead to save the actual material. And so before you weigh in on what your opinion is on the topic, Dan, I'm just kind of trying to frame this in the broader discussion that happened on the show, which is the idea that so many comics are doing the second thing, that it's giving people who haven't actually been to comedy shows before a sort of skewed idea of what happens in comedy shows, which is just interplay between the comic and like the crowd work that happens on top of the set, right? And so people think that that's what comedy is, and it's kind of maybe setting expectations in the wrong place. So with all that said, where do you weigh in on that dilemma?
Wow, that's a lot. Well, if anybody knows, I mean, if you've listened to this podcast, we've had these conversations, and if you know where I stand on crowd work, I'm not particularly a fan of it. Definitely, I get why comics do it. When it comes to deciding what material to put out, putting out crowd work versus regular material, I personally think, I think having, maybe a good balance between the two, maybe, but I don't like crowd work myself. And the problem I have with it is that now that social media has kind of defined what we have to put out for content, and that the trend has went for crowd work, it's a lot of crappy crowd work. It's the same crowd work with a different comedian. And a lot of times it's not good. It's not funny. Even if you're in the room, it wouldn't have been funny because it'll be the typical, what do you do for a living? And then crowd responds and comics like, I got nothing. And then they post it. And I think that's a bad representation of you as a comedian. If you're putting out bad crowd work, and that's what you're hoping, just to build followers and hoping they'll come to a show. If I see a comedian continually doing bad crowd work, I don't know that I'm going to go to that show.
Right.
So I don't know that it's necessarily a good representation of your product. However, if you are really good at crowd work and that's what's getting people to go and you're putting on a really good show, more power to you. And I've had this conversation with other comics about, on the other side of the aisle there, with using material that once you put it out there, you can no longer use it, or it's pretty much tabled or whatever. And I've had conversations with other comics about that nowadays people are expecting the content on social media, and even if they see, like, if you have a video that goes viral and that's what gets people to come to the show, if you do that one joke, you're still going to have, 100 other jokes that they might not have heard or seen online or whatever. So you're not burning your material necessarily. And with social media these days, I mean, people are still going to, I've seen comic put out all kinds of content all the time. And sometimes it's the same joke, just a different recordings of it, or, something to that effect. So you can, pick a handful of jokes that you use and just keep putting those out. That's a trick that I do. Sometimes I even recycle the videos. I just like repost the same videos that I made, just so I'm putting content out there, but I'm not burning all my fresh material.
Yeah.
I
absolutely.
Honestly, and I think with that, until you're filming a major special,
there you go.
I don't think like, if you're putting out little clips, it's whatever. I mean, because there's a good chance that, you don't have a big following anyway. So you might not, videos might not be going viral. So only a handful of people are seeing that content anyway. But you're feeding, helping feed the machine to hopefully blow up. But once you get to that, if you put out a special, whether, if you get lucky and you make it to Netflix or HBO, obviously you're not going to want to do that material anymore. It's time to start over. But I think it depends on the level you are as a comedian. Personally, I've been struggling with this because, I released an album a couple years ago now, and I still do some of the material from the album, and I've also developed some of it, so it's even better now. But I've kind of struggled with, I need to do new material, and it's out there, and I'm like, well, nobody's really bought the album. Like, I mean, I've sold some copies, but when you compare it to the whole grand scheme of the world, not many people have listened to this album. So it's like, well, if I go do these jokes in front of a new audience, chances are they haven't listened to my album. And even if they come see me live and decide, oh, I'm going to go check out his album, they might get some of the jokes that they, hear some of the jokes, but there's also a lot of material on that album that I don't do anymore. So
Mhm.
they're still getting some content or some, material that wasn't at the show and vice versa.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, you probably get this too. I mean, there's people who come see you and they will love hearing some of the materials.
mhm.
They actually go to see you to hear certain jokes.
Yep.
And you've had this happen, Dan. Like you're in the green room or in the lobby or out behind the venue before the show, and other comics like, dude, are you gonna do that one bit? Like,
Mhm.
like even comics who've heard your stuff 1,000 times want to hear certain jokes. And
Yep.
so I think it's win-win to put your actual material out personally. And it's number one, if you struggle like I do mentally with the concept of, well, I want to be able to have some kind of surprise for people, then it'll push you to write new stuff.
Mhm.
It's out there and that'll continue to challenge you. If you on the other hand, if you aren't, if you are telling jokes that you have put out there, guess what? That joke that got people excited and wanted them to come see you because they saw it on social, a lot of times they came to see that and they're
They're
hoping to
hoping to
see.
see it live. Yeah.
Exactly. So
Yep.
and so the expectation for Nate Bargatze or for these touring well-known stadium comedians that are coming to a theater near you, their expectation there is that they have something new that you haven't seen because
Yep.
their material is it's out there and it's widely consumed. But for most of us, like one of the luxuries of not being that well known is that you don't have to live up to those kinds of expectations in your career yet.
Yep.
And last thing I would say is, yeah, if you have crowd work and it's good and it makes a good, and more importantly, it translates well from live stage to video medium, do it. Put it out there if it helps you.
Yep.
But
Absolutely.
yeah, just kind of substituting it because you don't want to put your own stuff out there, that's somewhat limiting. And I'm a victim of that. I'm
Yeah.
a perpetrator of that.
Yep. And
I've done
I would like to add to this just to like as another perspective is, if you're putting out videos, 15 to 30-second videos, and you put out, 10, 15, that's only like 5 minutes of material. And if you're featuring or headlining, that means you're still doing 25 to 60 minutes of material at a show. So if it was 5 minutes of your material that got people to come out, they're still getting a good show, even if you do that 5 minutes at that show. And another good example of people wanting to see these jokes, look at Bert Kreischer. The machine bit, he still
Yeah.
has to do that bit a lot
And
of
there's a
times.
movie about it
And then they
now,
made a
right?
movie about it. Yeah. And
Totally.
yeah,
Good
he even
example.
wanted to quit doing the bit. And the demand from the audience was like, no, you need to do this all the
Right.
time,
Good
So
callback. That's right. So I think the main thing to unpack from Christopher's episode that I thought like provided some structure to what we talk about all the time, but I've never really thought of it in this way, are these 4 layers of bombing. So he
yeah,
actually
absolutely.
in the episode, I thought it was hilarious, and there's a snippet out there if you guys want to go check it out of this exact moment. But he unpacks the 4 layers of bombing, and it gets progressively more severe as a way to kind of like understand the severity of the bomb. So you could use this as like a methodology for categorizing the score of bombs. So here
Mhm.
here they are. He says layer 1 is just silence from the crowd. It can
Yep.
be almost interpreted as something else. You may even have a silent crowd that actually likes you, right? So that's sort of a bomb. Then the next layer is the audience seems a little distracted or disengaged. Like there's like a table that's kind of left, that's kind of checked out for a bit. And then third, the audience entirely gives up on you. Like
Sorry.
they entirely stop and have basically just moved on from you. They're talking, they're enjoying their night, and it's not you. Fourth, and this is his final layer, somebody actually has to stand up and speak on the room's behalf to get you to stop performing comedy.
Gotta tell you, you suck. I was laughing because when you got to the disengaged part, I purposely grabbed my phone and
Oh, you were
like
doing
I was
that.
on it, and you didn't even like it. Didn't even phase
I kept
you.
going. I kept going. That's right. Well, it's an
And then
audio
that made
podcast.
me break. It made me break the bit because I was like, "Oh, that's hilarious."
Yeah, Dan starts getting on his phone right as I'm on.
I was trying to
I
like.
thought you had an actual call. Yeah, that's insane. But
No, I was
happens.
trying to give an example of the audience disengaging.
That's what it looks like. They're on their phones.
Yep.
Now, every show, even if you're destroying, there's going to be somebody on their phone. Somebody's a little distracted. Something's going to happen. So I think there's
and nowadays too, quite a few clubs have been going to where you order from your phone too. So that makes it even trickier,
right?
Because you see people on their phones, and it's like, oh, get off your phone, but then, oh wait, no, support the club.
Yeah, I'm supporting the club right now. So yeah, though when I hear those 4 layers of bombing, it does actually help me give some context to maybe the bomb I had wasn't that bad. And if I look at levels 3 and 4, I mean, I've had very few that have really hit that number.
Yeah. And I think that's a good way to evaluate a set too. Like when you like a bad set, comparing it to these layers, it's like, well, what was the reaction to the set? How bad was the bomb? Was it a level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, that kind of thing. And I would also say you could maybe even add another layer or 2 layers, and that would be, and I guess the one layer I was thinking would technically be layer 4, same situation, and that's somebody standing, getting booed, which is essentially the same thing as somebody getting up and saying you suck. But the 5th level, I would say, is them walking out during your set.
There is a worse layer, right? Like
I would say that's if you walk the room, that's the ultimate bomb, I feel like.
Yeah, that's happened, like it's inevitable. And when at shows I've produced, I've had, like an MC that's just a little new to the scene and is trying some extremely hardcore, like blue material that they've seen work on, their favorite comedy special.
Yep.
But then like when they don't have the experience to know that when people are actually at a comedy show eating food, that might not be the time, especially from, your first joke. Right. So I had a situation where like I saw like a whole table get up and leave, and I ran out into the street to like try to see, hey, stop them. Hey,
you saw him get up and you ran for the door to lock him in.
Well, right. Yeah, that story could have gone like, but and then I barred the doors and I made them watch the show because you paid. No, I actually
you're gonna get your money's worth.
I chased him out into the street, and I was like, hey, look, the comics I have coming up after this aren't gonna sound like that. After I found out why they left. And then they were like, look, nah, man, we're kind of done. This just no offense. This just wasn't what we were expecting. I'm like, I get it, but you were only there for like 2 minutes. Yeah. So if it's cool with you, I'm going to go back inside. I'm going to get your money and I'm going to refund you. And I did that and everything was fine.
Well, that's a good way to like, recover from that. But that leads to a good point though, about comedy. Like people are quick to judge. And if they're, if somebody early on the show is really gross or raunchy or dirty, whatever it is, that isn't the cup of tea of somebody in the audience, and they get up and leave. Like you said, you try to like, oh, these other comics are going to be good, but they've already made the decision that the host show, like they're basing the host show off that one joke, and to them, and not just that show, comedy in general, they'll stop going probably stop going to live comedy, because of that. And I just saw that I posted about a show coming up. It wasn't even my show. I was just promoting a show for somebody, and one of the local Facebook groups. It was somebody was looking for recommendations of things to do, so I recommended a comedy show at the Comedy Fort, and somebody commented, "Oh, I don't go there anymore because all the comics are always dirty or whatever, blah 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 blah. Not my cup of tea," kind of thing. And that's fine. Everybody has the right to enjoy whatever they enjoy. But now they'll never go see live comedy there because they think it's too raunchy. And that's
because
not the
of
case.
one
Not
experience.
One experience, maybe two experiences. But yeah, it makes a difference. And I always find that worse too. Like when you're a newer comic, some comics like thrive off walking a room. They get excited. They're like, "Oh yeah, my material's just so raw. People can't stand it." And they leave. That's not good comedy, man. You don't want that. That's the opposite of what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
If you think being a good comedian is walking a room, or you think that's, raw, you're too raw. No, you're just not funny. And that's something you need to go back and start listening to your clips and maybe try to get better, because that's what it is. Your comedy's not raw. You're just not funny.
It depends on your goal, right? It's like, how many people can I offend, or how many people can I get a reaction from because I need that for myself? That's okay. But that's not going to be in alignment with anybody else on the show. That's what I was going to say. Like, any other comic is there to bring joy into the life of the people that are there.
And that's a good way to not get rebooked.
Yeah. I mean,
if your goal is to walk a room, your bookings are going to slowly dwindle, because
those are the consequences.
I feel like in comedy, one of the worst things is when you're, going towards the end of the show, and even whether showcase, whatever it is, and then a comic walks most of the audience. Like, that's the worst thing you can do to the rest of the comics on the show.
Right.
Is walk the audience.
Absolutely. So, like, just to kind of keep playing with this idea and wrap up, like, there was an episode, and I'm gonna have to go back to try to find it, but we had a guest on our show at one point sort of look at this same grading kind of scale, but on their jokes. So when you were doing the portion of the interview that talks about, what do you do to evaluate and analyze your set? I think this guest had a system for going back and rating his material.
Yep.
Like at 1, 2, or a 3 kind of thing. Like, he'd have a set list and then go back and like go through each joke after reviewing the recording and go, this was a 3, this was a 1, and just to have the data to go back to see how certain jokes performed.
Yep.
So same idea.
Yeah, and you could like flip it. So you could go reverse, where 5 is the first level, 4 is the second, of where you kind of go back, or you could go the regular, like what we talked about, and use it as a point system where you're evaluating the set 1 through 5, and 5 points being the worst, obviously.
Yeah.
You can use it as a scoring metric, and you could do that for each joke that doesn't do well, where you could go through and you could listen to your set. First joke, it got to a level 2. Second joke, it was a 0, whatever it is, and then you got a final score and then it's an overall rating of that set.
There you go. You can make an aggregate to see how you're doing.
Yep, absolutely. And the data matters. The data matters. The data, however you want to say it, it matters. Well, this has been great. Before we get out of here, we do have a question this week. So we're going to go into the Ask Us Anything segment.
Ask Us Anything.
All right. This week, our question is coming from Annalise Wright. She's a comedian out of Omaha that I've met a couple times. Great person, great comic out of Omaha. But her question, and I thought this was a fun question. It's a fun question. Is what is the wildest thing you've ever been offered for payment to do comedy? Now, it's a thinker, because for me, when I think why, it's not like because look at me. It's not like I've ever been offered like sexual favors or something like that. No. Nobody's out here being like, hey, Dan, if you do good at comedy, we'll take you home,
Yes. Yes.
Or offering that up front of the show.
Not to brag, but in the middle of my set, I did have a woman ask me if I was married.
Ooh,
This is obviously
okay.
before I got into my married material for the night.
No,
but
that's funny.
that
I got flashed once at a show.
Wow. So there's a form of payment.
Yeah, I
Right
mean, I
there.
guess that would be. I mean, if you were going to consider that a form of payment, like as far as like the wildest, I think that would be the wildest thing I've ever been paid.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's pretty typical for me. It's just like exposure, but I wouldn't say why that's wild. That's just, I mean, it's wild on a level that people have the audacity to ask an artist to work for exposure. But
Oh, right.
to me, it's just dumb. You know what I mean? Like
Uh-huh.
that's the dumbest thing I've ever been offered.
Yeah. Yeah, that is pretty dumb. Yeah, that is a good thinker. I mean, I've been offered like everyone food,
Yeah,
like
food,
pizza,
beer
chicken
tickets,
fingers, like
drink tickets,
yeah, I've definitely
lodging,
lodging,
no
food.
pay, just lodging.
Yeah. Hey, this includes a ride to the show. Uh like man. Yeah.
Get to drive the headliner. Oh wait,
Oh
that's
God.
not payment.
Right. Yeah, that's part of your expenses that you're
Yeah,
incurring.
right. It really is.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm kind of stumped on that one. I definitely have
That is
had
a
the
tough
food,
one. We might have
food a
to
lot.
think
Nothing
about
that it's
that
like a
and come
good
back with this
man,
one.
maybe we'll come back to it. I'll think of something, but there's nothing that would be I like the entertainment value that she'll derive from the answer is not very high based on what I have.
I would say, okay, for me, I wouldn't say this was payment for a show. I wasn't offered it, but it stemmed from a show. I did get to go hang out with, and I'm not gonna say where it was at, I'm not gonna allude to any info, but I did get to go hang out with a motorcycle club after a show, and I got a free T-shirt.
Okay.
They gave me a T-shirt,
You can
so
hang out with us like
yeah, I got to go hang out with them, and then then they gave me a
motor
T-shirt. So I guess
MC t-shirt
that's probably the wildest thing that I've ever got in payment.
in
is
return for
hanging,
doing the
yeah.
show.
But I mean, but
Yeah.
they weren't the ones that booked me. That just stemmed from the show. They were at the
Right.
show, and it just
Yeah.
worked out. But
There wasn't like a contractual listen. You go up there, do some jokes. If I like the set, t-shirts will be involved. It wasn't like that. It was just it kind of came from doing it.
yeah,
They
it
knew you
happened
started
organically. They were at the
organic.
show. They enjoyed it. We went and hung out after the show. Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah.
Great group of fellas. And that's all I'm going to say about that. In case they're listening. If I end up missing, you'll know why.
Yeah. Yeah. You didn't say the name. They don't know.
No,
yet.
I didn't. I know.
Yeah.
I didn't. I didn't even say where the show was.
Yeah, dude. You are clear.
I'm
Yeah.
clear.
There's no reason for you to disappear.
No, but yeah, it was a good time. But yeah, we might have to come back to that in the new year. Actually put a little thought in that because yeah, I just can't think of what the wildest thing would be.
Good question to the listener. Yeah.
That is a good question. If I'd like to know that's a good point. And you should, if you're listening, go into the Facebook group, the Art of Bombing Bomb Squad Facebook group, and let us know what the wildest thing is that you were offered for payment to do comedy. Because I'd be interested to see the different things, because like I said, for me, the wildest thing is always gonna be exposure because it's wild that people ask
think that
us to do that. Yeah, that it's okay. It's like any other business. It's not like you would ever hire a professional plumber and ask them to come, do the work for exposure. You know what I mean? Like,
I'm going to invite my neighbors. They'll watch you do that. You could die from exposure.
Exactly. That's how I look at exposure. You can die from exposure. All right. That's going to do it. This is the final episode of this podcast for the year. Thank you guys so much for listening and continuing supporting us. We've been doing great on the charts. We've been hitting the top 50, top 100 on all the charts on different podcast applications. And that's thanks to you that are listening, the audience, and supporting the podcast. We really appreciate that. We hope you guys have a very happy holiday and get refreshed, and we'll see you back next month in 2024. Goodbye.
This has been a Tape Deck Media production. Thank you for listening.